And this something that is born there at the threshold of those two codes. I mean, the original code and the translated code is called in the that is how it is treated by William Frawley. It is called the third code. The third code. When we are speaking about the third code, it is necessary to highlight some deforming tendencies introduced by Antoine Berman. Among those deforming tendencies, the author suggests distinguishing among rationalization, that is, in his understanding, rationalization of the text is the increasing logical cohesion. That is, the text under consideration becomes more cohesive, that is, more logically connected. I mean, the sentences in the text are more logically connected. Another deforming tendencies in his, as he treated, is explicitation. Sorry, this is one T is missing. Sorry, this is my error. Explicitation, that is, what is explicitation? This is introducing more information than it was in the source text. That is, the translator deliberately or unconsciously introduces more information than it was in the source text. As a result, the target text becomes more redundant. The next one is, the next deforming tendencies is the destruction of vernacular network or their exoticization. That is to say, if the text, the original text, had a lot of idioms, a lot of cultural words, like, so sometimes they are called realia, and the target text contains no or contains little idioms. That is, when translator omits or tries to compensate these idioms by using some, for example, by applying a descriptive translation, right? So we can speak that this is a real deforming tendency as treated by Antoine Berman, and this is of course a marker of the third code. And two more. Actually, the list of deforming tendencies is richer than it is seen here as it is presented here, but two more I want to draw your attention to is the destruction of expressions and idioms. When I was speaking about the vernacular network, that is, I was speaking more about realia, whereas realia, cultural or culture-bound or nationally bound expressions. So, and finally, quantitative impoverishment of lexical varieties. That is, lexical variety in the target text is sometimes significantly lower than it was in the original text. So by lexical variety, I mean that the text, the target text, the translated text, contains less notional words than different notional words than the original contained. So this is has a negative impact on the lexical variety quotient, on the lexical richness. An Israeli scholar and in the field of translation studies, Gideon Turi, classifies or suggests his label for those deforming tendency. He calls them as laws. And he implies here by saying it that they are laws. He implies that this is typical like laws or regularities. This is typical for any translation. Andrew Chesterman, in his works published in this millennium, calls those phenomena, I mean, deforming tendencies, translation universals. And a lot of scholars who work in the field of translation studies share this common label with other people, with other scholars, with other translators, and they call translation universals. And he divides this set of translation universals into two groups, so-called S universals and T universals. Why S? Because by S universals, he means related to translations from the source to the target language. That is S, source, S universals. And T universals are related to comparisons of translational and non-translational texts. That is target text. When we compare a text in the target language, translated text, with the texts with texts that are not translated in this language, that is naturally produced by native speakers. Okay, so the most important feature of translation universals is that their emergence in translation does not depend on languages involved. That is to say, I will speak about Ukrainian translations as compared to original Ukrainian texts, but actually they do not depend on the languages. That is, any language like English or Spanish or Portuguese or German or Japanese is characterized by those features, that is, has these features. Okay, so they are, I mean, those translation universals or deforming tendencies are products of human psycholinguistic transcoding activity. The main goal of our study was to compare the translational and non-translational texts. So, as you see, the search for T universals as deformations was the main goal of our endeavor. So the material was original texts of fiction in Ukrainian, that is to say, written by Ukrainian writers, texts of fiction, and the second part was English texts of fiction translated into Ukrainian. That is, those texts were translated from the English language. There were three tasks to solve here. So to create a comparable corpus of Ukrainian original and translated texts of fiction. It is called a comparable corpus. To carry out a computerized psycholinguistic analysis of two subcorpora, and finally to describe the results and draw differences between them. A few words about the Ukrainian comparable corpus, or simply UCC. The size is not very, impressive. The size was only 4 million tokens. The features of the corpus, among the features of the corpus were that this corpus incorporated two subcorpora. The first contained 100 original Ukrainian texts. The size of each text in the subcorpus was 20,000 tokens, and 100 translated from English texts, translated into Ukrainian, to the same language. And it contained 100 texts, and the size of those texts was 20,000 tokens each. According to Sarah Laviosa's conception, a classification of corpora intended for translation analysis, our corpus UCC was finite, diachronic, that is, it contained texts written by different authors in in different, maybe not epochs, but different time. For example, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century. So it was balanced. There were texts written a few centuries ago. At the same time, they were balanced by the texts written today. Not today, but recently. Okay, that has been written recently. That's why the text, the UCC is diachronic. Specialized because it was specialized because it contained texts of fiction, not medical texts or economic texts, but texts of fiction. Monolingual, since the corpus contained two subcorpora, and each corpus contained Ukrainian language texts, that is translated into Ukrainian and originally written in Ukrainian. That's why it's monolingual. It was written, it's natural, and unannotated because no metadata as to grammatical, semantic, or semantic features of those texts was when necessary. They were not necessary. Why? Because we process those texts, unannotated texts, but by using with the use of the program Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, Look 2015. The program was designed by the Texas scholars. The leader of the team was James Pennebaker, a famous American social psychologist who was one of those of the authors of this program. Look 2015. And SPSS 2026 version. We used SPSS to process our mathematical data. So a few words about linguistic inquiry and word count, or simply Look. So Look classifies words into style words and content words, as treated by James Pennebaker and his colleagues. Style words, as understood by them, are all functional words. Why style? Because they belong to the style. They characterize the style of the speaker, the manner the speaker expresses their ideas. Among the style words are typically pronouns, preposition, conjunctions, particles. That is, those words that have lack of semantic meaning, right? And content words, on the contrary, are represented by verbs, nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. As I said at the outset of my presentation, these are notional, so-called a group of notional words. That is, those that have semantic meaning. Look contains over 70 categories. Why do I call this program psycholinguistic? Because it's clearly psycholinguistic, because it contains linguistic and psychological categories. And among linguistic categories, you can see the style words and content words. That is, it counts, the program counts style words and content words. And psychological characteristics, it can count the affect category, that is positive, negative emotions, sadness. It can define the specific weight of anger words in the text. So it's truly psycholinguistic. It's a truly psycholinguistic tool. Since our focus was style words, I will explain why were style words our focus in this research. Traditionally, style words are a part of our passive vocabulary, that is, of the speakers and native speakers. For example, in Ukrainian or in English, the number of the number of words that pertain to your passive vocabulary is nearly 400 to 500 words. And these words, these small words, so-called functional words, the small words, style words, constitute only 0.5% of the vocabulary, of all the vocabulary. Say, for example, if we have 70,000 words, so you see the part of style words is tiny. But if we count those words in the text, in the speech, in any discourse, I mean, their specific weight will be in English almost 50%, even more. It depends upon the functional style of the text under consideration. In Ukrainian, it's 35%. So you see that this is an impressive count, since only 0.5% of the vocabulary and 50% in the text, in the discourse, in actual discourse. So James Pennebaker, since he was one of those who designed this tool, hypothesized that style words are produced in Broca's area, that is known for speech production. I think you know this. Actually, this is, I can't say that this is fact, because Broca just suggested that Broca's area, this is an area where they are produced. Wernicke's area is the domain where, as James Pennebaker said, is the domain where content words are produced. According to Mim Olahan, according to her, focus on automated unconscious processes in defining deformations should be on style words. That is, she didn't call them style words, but on those words that have procedural meaning. Thus, style words correspond to this criterion. They have procedural meaning, and translator, when they use style words, they do not control, or there is a lack of their control of these style words. So you can see the matrix of how it looks like. You see how it looks like in look, all the data in the tables, and we have the left column is represented by text, and all of them, for example, WPS. The third column, it means that words per sentence, that is the mean number of words in a sentence. Okay, so since the texts were not the direct translations of the original text, they were translated from the texts were represented by translations from from one language, but other texts than those that were produced by native speakers, Ukrainian native speakers. We applied Kolmogorov-Smirnov test and Mann-Whitney U test. You can see this is an image of so-called cognitive asymmetry, a term introduced by Halverson, of translated and untranslated texts. It is represented. So this asymmetry is, I guess, it's clearly seen here, and you see this other results. And what we see on the top of this image, of this figure, all those significant deviations of in the translated text as compared to the original text. So the main results were mean ranks. We counted, that is, the program counted, SPSS counted mean ranks of linguistic units like pronouns, fillers, like gap fillers, discourse markers, kind of well, so, okay, good. That is those which are used in their procedural meaning, right? So you see that the mean ranks of, the mean ranks of pronouns and words per sentence were increasing, that is, increased in the text, in the translated subcorpus. And all the rest, fillers, informal speech markers, negative constructions, conjunctions and prepositions, and causal markers decreased in as the SPSS showed. So you see, we defined explicitation as a deforming tendency, normalization, simplification, implicitation, and rationalization. Okay, now I want to explain something that was found in our as a result of the processing. Explicitation in the Ukrainian translated subcorpus can be demonstrated by the increase of pronouns, the mean rank, and this increase of pronouns causes lowering of lexical variety quotient. That's true because, you know, if we use more, not we, translators, and we, of course, if we use less pronouns, so naturally the use of notional words like nouns will increase, right? And the use of pronouns does not necessarily, it doesn't guarantee the increasing of lexical variety, but it is a good prerequisite, right? So while the increase of mean sentence lends to a higher readability quotient, that is a complication of the text understanding. That is, when the sentences are longer, the longer the sentence is, the higher readability quotient is. Readability quotient, that is how we understand the text, to what degree we understand the text. So it means that explicitation negatively has a negative impact on readability, despite the fact that it seems that explicitation is something when we clarify something, but this is not necessarily so. Normalization as another deforming tendency or translation universal in the corpus, in the Ukrainian translated subcorpus, is marked by the decrease of fillers, decrease of a number of fillers and informal speech markers. And this phenomenon causes the degree of formality. That is, those texts are more formal. That is, translators make those texts, unconsciously make those, their translations more formal than they were in the original. So as a result, they break that naturalness of translated text. Simplification is revealed through the use of lower use or less frequent use of negative constructions. But here the question is debatable, since we could say that interference is possible, since English does not have double negation. Unlike Ukrainian, it does have double negation. Implicitation, you see explicitation through the use of pronouns, but implicitation is revealed in the target text, in the translated text, through the use of, through the less frequent use of conjunctions and prepositions. And as a result of since we have a lack of conjunctions and prepositions, the logical cohesion of the text, of the target text, has decreased. No, derationalization means that the causal markers mean rank decrease. The decrease of the use of causal markers distorts understanding of logical and temporal relations in the Ukrainian target text by the Ukrainian readers. So, according to the estimations, according to the data, implicitation was the main psycholinguistic deformation, established through statistically significant deviation of the number of conjunctions, pronouns, and prepositions. As I said, they serve as a basis of cohesion, one of the main text categories. To define predictors of cohesion in both subcorpora, a regression analysis was applied, and cohesion here served as a dependent variable. So these are models of cohesion of the source of the original subcorpus, of the original Ukrainian subcorpus, and figure 3 demonstrates the regression model of cohesion in the Ukrainian translated subcorpus. So this analysis discovered the following. Causal markers as independent predictors of cohesion were significant in the Ukrainian original corpus, but subcorpus, but insignificant in the Ukrainian translated corpus. And the use of causal markers like because, effect, hence, that are incorporated in the look broader category in the of cognitive mechanism implies active process of reappraisal. This is a term suggested by Tauschik and Pennebaker in 2010. So their statistical insignificance in constructing cohesion of translated text shows insufficient depth of target text cognitive processing by translators. This and other deformations create cognitive asymmetry between Ukrainian translated texts and non-translations, that is, original text in this language. Of course, as any study, our study has limitations. The first is the lack of linguistic or psycholinguistic study of translation based on look. So psychologists like to use look in their studies, but linguists are a little bit reluctant, and especially this is true for translation studies. The corpus, Ukrainian comparable corpus, is rather small. Of course, I think you will agree that 4 million tokens is not so big, right? No evidence of neurolinguistic factors that cause deformations in translation, and the problem of terminology consistency, because some people call those items deforming tendencies, others call translation universals, then laws, so regularities. So among the prospects of further research are comparison of Ukrainian comparable corpus with comparable corpora of other language pairs. For example, Spanish, English, or Spanish, German, or Portuguese, German, or Portuguese, English, or Portuguese, Ukrainian, actually. Investigating comparable corpora in less studied languages. The next is investigating comparable corpora of other functional styles, for example, science and technology, economic, business. Analysis from the translation ethics perspective, since deforming tendencies violate traditional ethical principles of translators' activity. I think you saw this picture somewhere. Of course, there are a lot of people who criticize translation like any other activity, human activity. Yeah, we like to criticize everything. There are those who talk, who want to discuss those topics, and among the doers, I mean translators, there are not so many people who actually do a great job, because as José Saramago said, I'm not sure, maybe this is a Brazilian author, I'm not sure. Maybe our monitor Deborah will tell us. So writers make national literature while translators make universal literature. So that is what they do is great, and it's a great job. So thank you very much. Here you can see my email. I hope.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if anyone has any questions or would like to say something, a comment, or...
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question about I'm interested in machine translation. Have you studied any influence of your study on possible machine translation for the future? Could we teach the systems how to use this to improve automatic translation in the future?
Yeah, thank you, Deborah, for your question. So I think, one of the outcomes of this research could be to design a list of recommendations for translators of what not to do in translation. That is, what should be avoided in translation. So that is to say, if we say, as we have already discovered, the use of conjunctions and prepositions is lower in the target text. That is to say, we should teach our translators, our young translators who study at the Department of Translation, we should teach them to use, that is, not to omit them in translation. Speaking about machine translation, this is a great topic. I'm dealing with this topic right now, today, I mean, since I'm trying to discover some ethical points, especially if we speak about neural machine translation, because neural machine translation is something that is fantastic. It translates, I tried many times, I don't remember, DeepL, it seems to me. So when I change something in the translation, in the target version, it suggested the whole sentence was being restructured on the spot. That is, I saw that when I, for example, I substituted one word for another in the translation, that is, I didn't like that translation, the whole sentence was restructured, was being restructured by the artificial intelligence, So if we have more corpora, comparable corpora, and we have those results, it's possible to teach those neural machine translators, because they are based on neural networks. It's possible that since they are taught, they are learned through corpora, right? So if we have corpora so the first stage is to teach our translators what to do, what not to do, and they will translate, and their translation products will be corpora for machine learning, for neural machine translators, And as a result of this learning, machine translators will perform better. That is, they will translate with less flaws, They will be more flawless. That's what I see, what I can suggest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. Kind of combined with the last question, how do you, and again, it could be because I'm not familiar with the field of translation, the cultural aspect, because oftentimes when we read translations, when you were saying at the very beginning of your lecture that you were reading something and it just something, but this third code, something's missing. Is that third code kind of the cultural piece of language, or the things that, again, growing up in a certain country, culture, there's these implicit, you learn how things are discussed or words that are used, that again, when it comes to translation or even machine translation, is there a way that they're looking to encompass that kind of cultural aspect of translation? So just in general, I was curious how that's done, or if it's done.
Thank you very much. What I think is, and as it was implied by the so-called author of the third code, right, who discussed Froli, that is something that is universal across cultures. That is to say, this code is typical for all translations. That is, when we translate from English into other languages, not necessarily Ukrainian, you translate to other languages, those typical features can be discovered in any translations. That is to say, if I compare a translation and non-translation, you will always see that this is translation. This is translation. So, so from this standpoint, I don't think that this is something that is culture peculiar, that is culture based. This is universal. And maybe that's the reason they are called translation universals, as suggested by Andrew Chesterman. So this is what I think, how I see. Thank you. Okay, no other questions, right? Thank you for your attention. I was happy to share something with you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is she in the room, is Psycholinguistics of the text and Psycholinguistics of translation. No. Well, the third one is Psycholinguistic Peculiarities of Perceiving Foreign Language Grammatical Structures. Well, is there any of the next speakers in the room? Yes? So, okay, you have a problem with the mic. Yes, sure.
Yes. Good day, colleagues. I'm from Ukraine, Khrystyna KHVOROST. Can I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, just a second, please. Just a second. So first of all, I'm so happy to be a participant of such a great Congress, and greetings from Ukraine to all of you. And it is a pleasure to introduce our research results in this auditory. Let me. I'm representing the Volyn region and the University, Lutsk National Technical University, and also Volyn Medical Institute. And today we are talking about the information and its influence on the perception. Let me open the window. Can you see my presentation slide?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sorry with these technical nuances. Speaking about psycholinguistic effects of gender-based advertising.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Now I can't see it.
You cannot see?
No.
Correct?
Not now.
Okay, let me try again.
You should open this presentation first, and then start presentation.
Okay. What about now? Can you see it? What about now?
Okay, now yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So, psycholinguistic effects of gender-based advertising on information and psychological safety. And today the outline of my presentation is the results, the procedure, and the main methods, and of course the conclusion of our research. So advertising became an important media lever of influence in modern society, and however, with increased competition and mass manipulation, negative influences via innovative information technologies, psychological disorders increase became radical nowadays, and especially during our distant communication during the pandemic. Mass communication, let's say. First, advertisement this safety state become more advanced, and that they trigger individuals' inner values and fears within the target auditory. And finally, gender differences help increase the manipulation level, which can be polar for information and psychological safety in particular, and society overall. Thus, there is a necessity to investigate the advertising effects from psycholinguistic view, preventing their destructive influences and activating stimulating effects on the information and psychological safety development. So the aim of the investigation was to analyze gender-based advertising, psycholinguistic effects on information and psychological safety development. The procedure. Establishment advertising the gender differences text for men and women, determined information distribution, syntactic peculiarities with the psycholinguistic methods help for studying effects on the individual's information and psychological safety. Copy testing and psychographological methods helped understanding the most effective tricks in advertisement, determining what we must stress and what must avoid in the advertisement, recalling, comparing advertising text with gender disposition. Investigation that I'm honored to introduce to you had two parts. So first part showed main effects and make the target audience more susceptible to information manipulations, which influence on the level of information and psychological safety of the video. So the first part of the research material comprises 95 advertising texts and 176 texts taken from magazines, Weekend FT, How to Spend It, and newspaper The Financial Times. According to psycholinguists and psychologists, information and psychological safety is a human psychoprotection state from negative information influences on persons' consciousness and unconsciousness, which leads to the person's decisions, inadequate perception. Advertising text contains information of three types, cognitive, emotional, and aesthetic. The last two play the leading role, emotional and aesthetic, evoking emotional co-effect and desire to have the object advertised. That is why copying test and advertising investigation method considers the text impact into three dimensions: cognitive, affective, and connotative. So this corresponds to cognitive, emotional, and aesthetic information. Our data show that men advertising contains predominantly cognitive information, and while women texts are rich in more emotional and aesthetic information, which influences on particular gender category information and psychological safety more directly. One of the methods which was used during the investigation was psychographology analysis method, which allows defining text linguistic peculiarities and preceding its influence on the target audience. Data show that advertisements for men are larger, associated with the necessity to render cognitive information greater amount. The factor of verbosity, aggressiveness, is naturally higher in men materials, since they are much more exposed and expected to be more aggressive. Logical cohesion factor characterizes more women advertising to affect women emotionally. These effects make information and psychological safety more sensitive to destructive influences and manipulations. The second part of the research had such hypothesis. We hypothesized that linguistic, cultural, and economic contexts have an influence upon the individual attitude towards information, such as implication and use. The procedure of the second part was as follows. So we, based on the we're interviewing of 54 Ukrainian undergraduate students from Lesia Ukrainka Volyn National University and 47 American undergraduate students from the University of Central Arkansas, Conway, USA. The study was based on the questionnaire in which the attitude of information and specificity of information used derived from different spheres of life, for instance, sports, family, professional growth, and others, and taken into the account. Also, the main sources of information, the most appropriate for students for both countries, were analyzed. And as the selection information source depends on the degrees of interactivity, the relevant, distinctive, and common features were followed. The aim of the second part of the investigation was to investigate the specificity of information use, diversity, and differences in information perception between countries, USA and Ukraine. The questionnaire is prepared in 2 languages, and the translating procedure was used during the validity process and conducted to the test validity of the questionnaires. First, the questionnaire needed to go through the translation process, minimum of the professional linguists, and then vice versa translation. And after 3 weeks later, the questionnaire were given once more to the participants of the research program. The reliability of the pilot study questionnaire is assessed based on achieving correlation coefficient. Results of our research has shown that information is an important component of modern students, and young people of both countries express adequate attitude to information. There are many similarities in the implementation of cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functions of information among students of both countries, but there are some differences. The results of empirical research showed that students of the USA took an interest primarily in the fresh information, ascribed to it great value, while Ukrainian students were focused on older and seemingly more reliable information, reflecting not only in mass media, but also in printed and online newspapers, magazines. The Ukrainian participants were more sensitive, even vulnerable to negative information impact, whereas their American colleagues paid more attention to broader scope of information topic coverage instead. However, they were less attentive to the information concerning development in sport. Here we see the diagram. The first column, we see the interest in new information. It is almost the same. The dark green shows the American results, the results of American students, and light green is Ukrainian side. The second point was the importance of all the received information. So for Americans, it is more valued. The next one is psychological discomfort when the information is not as such as was expected. So for Americans, it is more valued, but it is almost not very important overall, according to the results. The most important, we see the last positions. So this one is information, the importance of information for personal development, and we see for American students it's much more larger than Ukrainian component, and vice versa. The last one, information for stimulating to sport activities. So here we see the Ukrainian results be larger than Americans. And the conclusions. Consequently, the aforementioned results show the significant difference in structures of the advertising of opposite gender categories, so that the information usage influence on the degrees of information and psychological safety, and can deter or stimulate the development of the former through the gender leverage. And also the perspectives of our results is to investigate the differences, gender differences during the pandemic situation, and while the communication via internet and distant communication. Thank you very much for your attention. Do you have any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So here are my contacts. Please, I will be pleased to answer your question if you have any specific question or for future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting to hear you. Well, who is ready to speak now? Okay.
my turn already or no?
Excuse me?
Is it my turn already or it's someone else?
Oh yes, you can go. It's okay.
Okay. Hello everyone. I hope my mic is okay already and you can hear my voice.
Yes.
Right.
Perfectly.
So, okay. Right. Today I would like to focus on one of the, kind of insight into the problem that we are currently facing in our university, and generally not a university, but in different universities in Georgia. This is the country which I represent here at this meeting. So when it's a bit too much to say that I represent the entire country, but I would like to speak on behalf of some of the teachers who are involved in preparation of the program in translation for different universities in Georgia. And when we were establishing this program, we have come up with the problem of actually drawing up the content which would meet the standards internationally, generally, when we allow our students to finally leave the university and start translating, and at the same time which would satisfy the students' needs during the years of the study. And so whenever we think that yes, the program is okay, of course something comes up and we have to work on it over and over. How is all this related to pragmatics? What we wanted to focus on is that quite often when we train our interpreters and translators, we seem to neglect this particular aspect, which actually has it has crucial role in terms of actually fulfilling your duty as a translator. Quite often we deal with the fact when we translate the certain things that come from a different country, the different language, let's put it this way, we have to do a so-called localization, which does not always go smoothly, does not always reflect what the original text always intended to do. So this is unavoidable, of course, and we have to take this into consideration when we train our translators, but unfortunately some of the aspects are being overlooked regularly. And throughout these years, we have tried to identify what were the problems that need to be improved in this respect. One of the aspects that we have singled out, which is one of pretty boresome for us, is actually the grammatical asymmetry, which is the part of the overall linguistic asymmetry, which is being studied by the translation theory in the scope of and in the light of the comparative linguistics. However, this aspect, which we mentioned, the grammatical asymmetry, is quite often overlooked. Its importance is underestimated very severely by the trainers who actually are responsible for drawing the future translators' attention to the potential problems. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact which indicated the way the students themselves, students of English philology who are interested in translation, who were doing that, and also the translation studies students themselves in Batumi State University mostly, throughout the past 4 or 5 years, even 5? Yes, 5 years. This student mostly focused on translation during the translation and the evaluation of the translation and each other's peer evaluation. They mostly focused on things such as semantics. Even phonology sometimes draws more attention from this side than grammatical aspect. Whereas it is extremely important to actually remember that we are not only focusing on the meaning, but we're focusing on the form as well. And in this respect, what we usually pursue is the Jacobson's approach. I personally like it very much. I would like to share the slide, but I couldn't do it so far. I will try to do it now, if it's okay. Yeah, like that. Can you see it or no?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Right. So what we try to presume is that we quite often have to sacrifice something when translating, and that's what we want our students to understand. You cannot always manage and do everything. You have to balance it somehow. So on the one hand, we teach them that yes, the text might have a more focus on the cognitive aspect of it, so its content can be more important in translation. On the other hand, the text might be, yes, dominantly cognitive, but it has some other functions to achieve. So that is why it is important somehow to juggle, and you have to do the following. So you sacrifice either the form to preserve the meaning, or sometimes the meaning has to be sacrificed in order to preserve the form, and so on. And the last part, this pragmatics, quite often is neglected when it comes to focusing on the grammatical aspects in translation, as it was mentioned. So we have started with giving actually our students just to test the way they feel the language, because it's always difficult to teach it when you actually first have to teach them that foreign language itself. So they sometimes don't feel it, these kind of things. For example, we started with the introduction of the test in order to see if they actually can feel the difference between no smoking and thank you for not smoking. So do they feel this kind of gradation, which little by little actually overtook our minds when we started with the prohibition, direct prohibition, and we have moved throughout these years to the request, to thanks, and so on and so on. And when we ask them to translate, it turns out that sometimes they translate the very last sentence, thank you for not smoking, the same way they would translate no smoking. Why? Just because they're used to it, because they usually hear no smoking, right? They usually hear the directive and they do it. They recreate it in their translation. And it turned out when we asked them what is easier, why they do that, quite often they have responded that just because the ear, as they say, the ear is used to hearing it this way, the eye is used to seeing it this way. So, and it is something that is hard to fight against, something that students are used to. So that is why it is very important to actually draw students' attention at the level of the preparation of these translators, rather than seeing the mistakes that they make quite often when they actually already start translating. Now, when we speak of the language symmetry, yes, we have to consider that, yes, we focus on the phonological aspect and semantic aspect and grammatical aspect, but among the grammatical aspect, we would like to single out two aspects which we think feel that are often neglected by translators when they do their job, such as gender and number. Mostly I would like to focus on the gender this time. When it comes to gender, we have to remember one thing. So in our research, we have compared and we have dealt with students whose working languages were English, Georgian, and Russian occasionally. Mostly it was predominantly English and Georgian, but Russian was also here and there, let's put that discrete. So when it came to perception of the gender-specific aspects in the sentences, or in particular, for example, when they had to translate the title or the part of the movie and similar things, it turned out that students who are predominantly Georgian, they do not actually care for the gender at all. The point is that probably you don't know the peculiarity of our language, but our language is pretty much very politically correct language, because our language has no gender. We have semantic gender, like father and mother. We know that who the father is, who the mother is, and so on. But the point is that grammatically it is not reflected anyway. Even the pronouns, so in English you can say that, yeah, the situation is similar, but since the pronouns he and she are there, and there is a big deal about it now in this political correctness discussion, Georgia doesn't have this problem. And that's actually one of the reasons why our students have the problem learning pronouns when they study Russian language or when they study English language in general. So it takes them years sometimes to actually master it. So they can be calling he to anyone, male or female, doesn't matter. So when it comes to translation, even really good students who have good knowledge, good academic background, good thinkers and great thinkers and so on, they still, somehow do not realize the importance of it. And I would like to draw your attention to the mistakes which sometimes they make. But first we'll start with a smaller scale problem. So when it comes to gender, in fact, quite often it's a minor discrepancy that we're dealing with. It's not a big deal. So for example, in this sentence, there she goes, right? So it's part of the dialogue from Three Men in a Boat. And when it was translated in the following way. In Russian, it sounds like here he goes, all right, because parakhod itself, the word which was used instead of the word ship, instead of the word boat, it was it had the gender of it has masculine gender. That's why it was turned into he instead of she. And in the Georgian language, it could have been is or igi, but in fact, it's just completely taken out of the sentence because Georgian verb can express the person, and we just we don't use pronouns that often, in fact, in Georgian language. So, and this goes smoothly, it's okay. And that's one of the reasons why students actually neglect this problem. But if you come up with already different thing, for example, when you deal with the metaphorization of the gender, like father tames, right? So in translation, it's in fact starushka temza. It's already metaphorization of the certain object. Sometimes it happens in personalization examples, and our students in this case already come up with a serious problem of lacking a gender to convey this subtle meaning which sometimes is given in the language which has this grammar, this grammatical aspect. Now, again, if we take into consideration the way our students sometimes translate, they have to read everything, or they have to watch the entire movie or read the entire book in order to derive whether they need to translate certain word. For example, if you translate the word cousin from English into Russian, then in this case you have to take this into consideration because it's either cousin or cousina. But in Georgian language, again, it goes quite unnoticeably, and this is the case when our students have to be reminded that if, on the one hand, this problem is not a problem at all, like in this case, this вот он уходит, or this one, cousin, right? Translation. In other cases, it might become a huge problem because. What starts with as a little discrepancy, in fact, later on, it might expand and prevent you from and influence the way you perceive a certain character, the way it was drawn up by and imagined and presented to you by the writer or the movie maker, the director and the screenwriter, or it can even prevent you from understanding certain aspects. Nothing to say about the humor, which is quite often lost in translation. And yes, you, I guess, quite often had a chance to watch a movie. When you watch a movie and you think like, oh, is it really humor? Is it a comedy? Why? Because it's just lost. And that's what we are striving for. In order to translate the joke, you in fact have to understand the joke first. What's the meaning of it? And when it is based on the grammatical aspect which the students of the other language who speak the other language more fluently do not perceive that well, then when the losses start, it's not only that they cannot translate because they don't speak their own language well enough, to do that. They cannot master this art. But in fact, the real problem is that they do not perceive it the way it is supposed to be done. For example, when we first initiated the translation of the titles of the certain movie, when we had the movie festival, in the frame of this movie festival, we have it throughout every year. So it is, they sometimes participate in translating of the program itself. So they see only the title. They cannot see the movie and they cannot watch it before the festival starts. So in this case, it's pretty challenging for them to localize these titles. And this was not the part of the festival, but it is used as an example with which we worked on with students. And that's how they perceived it. So there was the sentence like the cook, the thief, his wife, and her lover. All right, and the Russian translation reflects this pretty well. The point is that it's this movie by Greenway is pretty symbolic. So every character who is given in this very long movie title, which is not typical for movie titles generally, but you can expect anything from Greenway. So they all have their own scheme. They all have their color scheme. They all have their image, which is needs to be preserved. So it was extremely important from the very beginning to understand who we're talking about. So the cook is a separate entity. So the thief, the wife belongs to thief. Let's put it this way. But the lover in Georgian language turned out to be the thief's lover, and it already changed the perception of the text initially. So in this case, it still can be tolerable. However, the next episode already illustrates the way students are sometimes deaf to humor in certain situations when it is gender-based, like "he's my sister," for example. That was part of the dialogue, which our students had problems actually understanding first, but when they finally realized what was going on, so "he's my sister" is translated pretty well into Georgian, into English, into Russian language, "on moya sestra," but in Georgian it is lost entirely because our pronoun, as I said, does not indicate that whether it is a man or a woman. So the humor was entirely lost of the humor of the situation and the irony of it. So respectfully, students were asked to provide their own solutions to this problem, and in this case they transformed it like "this man is my sister" and things like that. So it's not as skillful, I would say so, in translation, but at least it helped us to draw students' attention to the way they should perceive the text and the way they should handle the text, because sometimes they forget that the person who reads the translation does not have access to the original text, and when the translator knows what he is doing, the final outcome might still sound very differently. And this was a good exercise for them in order to train this kind of thing. There were the cases when the entire movie, the meaning of the entire movie was lost because of this kind of insensitiveness of the translators, and I would say even the directors who are responsible for dubbing of the movies, and the way the students also perceived it also surprised us, because they didn't realize what was the problem, which is surprising to me, which was surprising to me. So the movie was it was based on a true story. It was about the young man who thought that he was a woman, and he spoke about himself. He dressed up as a woman, and he thought as a woman, of himself as a woman. He behaved as a woman. He actually started dating a guy because he thought he was a woman. But the point is that in a Russian dubbed translation, you could always hear him speaking about himself when he was in conversation with other people, including his boyfriend, who had no idea that he's a man physiologically. He was referring to himself as a man, because Russian language actually shows this, whereas English language shows this gender at the level of pronoun in the third person. And if the person says, "I think," "I did," "I went," you can't see whether it is male speaking or a female speaking. But in Russian language, it is obvious. So it is "я пошла," "я сделала." That's for female would say, the female would say, but the male would say "я пошел," "я сделал," "я подумал." And respectively, if you use these second masculine forms and pronouns, in this case, you don't understand the idea of the whole film, right? So the way the character presents himself or herself. And it's not only a single movie, it's a number of movies where this kind of thing is being entirely neglected by the dubbing team, translators, the people who are responsible for all this entire process. And when we ask our students to actually translate some of the titles from similar movies, some of the dialects from these movies, it turned out that when they had to do it into Russian language, in this case we were limited in the number of the students, they also failed this in all cases. They just didn't do that properly, and we were really surprised to find out. I will not focus on Richard Kipling's The Jungle Book's translation, which is already like a classical example when Bagheera was turned from male into female, because I think a lot of people know that. But we just wanted to highlight that when it came to our students' perception of the way this gender is reflected, they themselves finally came up with the similar examples when they finally realized what was going on and what they were neglecting. So when we had this Ocean 11, so in translation, it sounds like 12 друзей Oceana in Russian language. And that's pretty much, that's a famous movie. Everyone likes it. However, when some years later, another movie like Ocean's 8 was introduced, the point is that some of our students were astonished to find out that it's not about the oceans himself, who is represented by George Clooney, right, as an actor. So not Ocean's friends, but his sister's friends, because the Russian poster actually suggested otherwise. It says 8 подруг Oceana. And the surname of foreign origin is not being changed in cases. It doesn't change cases in Russian language. So in fact, it should sound as a 8 подруг Ocean. And in this case, you will understand that we are talking about the female. So this is the case when it's being supported by the visual part. So since it's a movie, but when it comes to translation of the stories and when it comes to translations of the books, you don't have this kind of visual support, unfortunately, which can help translator not to deceive the reader. And throughout our study, when we focused on what mistakes mostly students make, we have discovered that this gender-related issue seems to be one of the most prominent problems, which is unfortunately being neglected when the translation courses are being prepared. And as we said, sometimes it's a small problem, but quite often it can be a significant problem in case of understanding humor, in case of understanding the entire message of the movie. And since we are not always dealing with something like that has the visual part to assist you in perceiving the text, we have to draw our students' attention to this particular problem, which they sometimes subconsciously make. And this is a problem that we consider deserves to have a special, I would say, not a course itself, of course, but it has to become the part of the course at the level of actually teaching the language itself, not only the translation studies. So we have some other aspects in grammatical asymmetry, but I've decided to focus only on the perception of the gender-specific or gender-related problems in our students' much, and it's part of our political correctness research, which we are doing currently. We haven't finished it yet. That's why we are covering only this one, because it's like already old, like to 2019. But we want to link it to the problem why our students sometimes speak politically incorrectly, because they simply do not understand it. They don't feel it, because our languages are too different. Our language, as I said, is gender neutral, and everyone is equal in this respect. We don't have to consider and bother ourselves whether it is he, she, or any third gender or alternative gender or whatever it is. But this problem has become more and more prominent, and our students are already starting to feel it. When they have to travel abroad, it's not only translators that face this problem because they are doing this translation, but also generally our students who are communicating more and more with the international community, not only online, but also offline, because we are having a lot of student exchange programs and they have to travel. We need to raise their awareness in this respect. Now, unfortunately, it's not being done properly, I think so. How do I stop it? Okay, this way. I hope I didn't take too much time of yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Hi, thank you. That was a very interesting presentation, just in terms of looking at the, like you said, the English, the Russian, and then the Georgian being, I guess, gender, not having them. Do you, and I'm not sure, within Georgia, do you see differences? Are there students that only speak, say, Georgian? And just trying to see the difference, because again, it's very current in terms of having, you know, especially with the different pronouns that are
being introduced currently.
Being introduced.
Yes.
So I was just curious. Again, I'm not sure. You know, it might be that there's, you know, students are bilingual, say in Georgian and Russian, and trilingual in English. But I was curious, have you encountered? Are there differences with students who may only be speaking with none of the pronouns, so only in Georgian and translating into English? Like, do you see differences between students?
Okay. So usually I see that that's a very good question, because I actually, but that's not that much from the research, but from my personal observation of my private, I tutor students privately and so on. Usually the students who are bilingual before they become trilingual, so they already speak Georgian and Russian, because there are quite a lot of students like that in Georgia, much less than in the past, but much still there's quite a big number. So my personal observation says that usually there is a difference. So if they already speak Russian, for example, they're more conscious about these differences of the gender. They're completely deaf to this when they are still Georgians. There are some very good students, as I said, who are very competent English speakers, really competent English speakers, but they still have this problem of switching. They speak about their sister and they use he, and this is driving me crazy, because I never had this problem, because Russian, I think, is a more native language for me than Georgian, actually. And I always was gender conscious in this respect. When it comes to students, when it comes to translation, I mostly deal with the students who speak Georgian. And some of them don't speak any other language apart from English. And as I said, it's a real problem. It starts at the level of actually teaching them English, because we get them when they already must be when they have mastered the language, more or less. But unfortunately, this problem remains. And even when I do the social linguistics with my English philology students, they still have this kind of misunderstanding of what political correctness is all about now when it comes to genders. And they are very surprised when they hear that there can be some other pronouns and some other gender specific words which are currently being discussed by the big part of the world, let's put it this way. It's going to be a huge blast for some of our students, and a huge surprise. In our concept, it's like when it comes to language, whatever does not have a name in most cases does not simply exist as a concept in the people's mind. And introducing this sensitive issue, I find it very, very difficult sometimes to discuss certain issues. I feel like I have to discuss it, and thanks God they're all of age and no underage people, so that no one can come after me. But yes, you have to speak to them about this. And when they speak Russian, they're more sensitive towards that, if that answers your question.
Okay. Well, I don't think we have other speakers in the room. I'm just checking at the program, okay? Well, I guess I'll leave the room open, but I think maybe we should finish this session, because the speakers are not here.
Well, I'm going to be leaving. I wanted to thank everyone.
Okay.
For
Thank you.
very
Thank you
interesting
so much.
presentation. So thank you again, and
So
have a good Friday. Bye.
thank you. Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for your presentations. I'm going to be closing the room now. I was just waiting for the other speakers, but I don't think they will be present. So now you can leave the room, okay? Thank you. Thank you so much.